And my guests this afternoon are the political commentator Hamish MacDonald in Edinburgh, and here in the studio with me, Magnus Gardam, the political editor of the Daily Record. Thank you both for coming in. If you had to cast your eye back over the past year of political activity, Magnus, what do you think is the top story?
Well, it has to be the referendum, and certainly...
Does it?
I'm afraid it does. I'm afraid it does. I mean, from the start of the year, we had the Prime Minister's intervention pretty much right at the beginning of January, which kick-started it all. Alex Salmond responded very quickly with his timetable. Then we had the wording, his preferred wording of the question. Then we had the launch of Yes Scotland. Then we had the launch of Better Together. It's been a referendum roller coaster, and to be honest, it sucked the life out of pretty much every other story.
And on it goes.
And on it goes.
Hamish, yes. What do you think?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Magnus is exactly right. And I think that, for us political anoraks here, that this is great. We're going to get another 2.5 years of that. But there is a danger, perhaps, that the public out there might get a little bit tired. We're only really 6 months into what is going to be a very, very long campaign that will last until at least October 2014, and it may even go on after that. So I think all the parties involved have to be a little bit careful that we don't get a little bit of referendum fatigue.
Magnus, what else, though, do you think were the most important news stories?
Well, I mean, sitting in our little corridor in Holyrood, it's easy to forget, actually, that we're in the middle of an economic crisis. I mean, growth is painfully slow. The employment situation is poor. I know every quarter we argue about whether Scotland is doing well compared with the rest of the UK, but actually we're just squabbling over fractions of 1%. Actually, there are nearly 100,000 young Scots out of work. There's been an alarming drift towards part-time employment as opposed to full-time employment. The STUC are saying that there's something like 500,000 Scots who are unemployed or underemployed. So there's a huge problem there. Now, it would be grossly unfair to lay that all at the door of the SNP government. I mean, the SNP and Labour agree that it's George Osborne's austerity drive that is the real cause of this. But there are question marks being raised about how certain SNP policies are impacting, whether they're helping or hindering, particularly their assault on colleges. And as the cuts begin to bite, and there was a report last week showing that we're only a quarter of the way through the cuts to services, the cuts to the revenue budget, which has to be achieved, then I think those questions will come to the fore, yes.
Hamish, what about the renewables questions? Because there's sometimes conflicting evidence on the potential value of the renewables programme.
Yeah, I think this is one issue which has been bubbling around in the background, and it's going to continue to really affect politics across the country. I mean, if you look at what the SNP have done, they've said we want to have 100% or the equivalent of 100% of Scotland's electricity produced by renewables by 2020. Now, that's a very, very ambitious target, the most of which they're saying will come from wind power. But as this has gone on and as we've got closer to that 2020 timetable, people have started to ask questions as to whether we are really on the right lines, as to whether, yes, renewables is right, but whether we should be waiting a little bit longer to see how tidal and wave power really develop, not putting all our eggs, towards wind farms. And I think that as the SNP pushes and pushes on this manufactured target of 2020, people will start looking at places like Denmark, which have been along this road before us, and say, is this really the right way to go? So I think that this one is something which the SNP set up as a big target for the future, but they're going to have to start answering some questions on.
OK, now you're both staying here because shortly we're going to be looking at what's creeping up on the political horizon once Holyrood comes back. Also with me, Magnus Gardam of the Daily Record and the political commentator Hamish MacDonald. And for a Westminster perspective, we're joined by James Cusick of the Independent newspaper, who's in our Millbank studio. Thank you very much indeed, James, for joining in. What are the waves of Scottish politics that wash up at Westminster?
Well, I suppose this is bad news. Scotland's 24/7 obsession with the referendum question really hasn't hit Westminster and the UK media in much the same way, and that's not because there's no room left for the Olympics. It's just it hasn't had that kind of resonance. Now, there's maybe two reasons for that. One, I think it's a matter of Westminster not wanting to be embarrassed, however much they've tried to corral and order Holyrood and Alex Salmond. That's not particularly worked. So I think rather than get involved at this early stage, I think maybe they're keeping their powder dry and they will deal with this later. But it's certainly not the obsession that it is in the Scottish media.
Hamish, if we were to look forward then to what you think might be waiting in the long grass for the various political parties at Holyrood once they come back, what do you think will be the key areas?
Well, I think what's most interesting is the fact that I think the narrative of Scottish politics has changed over the last 6 months. We came into this year with the SNP being all-powerful. They'd won that huge majority at the last Scottish elections. Labour was on its knees, and then we had the local elections where Labour changed the tone of Scottish politics. Labour started fighting back. It started getting its councillors back. It didn't actually necessarily win the greatest number of councillors, but we saw the Labour Party revive. Now, a lot of that is down to Joanne Lamont. She's done a very, very good job. But since then, we've seen opinion polls suggesting that independence is not quite enjoying the support that perhaps the SNP would like it to, and that's the tone and that's the context that we're going to see going into the next political year. We're going to see the SNP, for the first time since that election victory, kind of on the defensive to a certain extent, and you're going to see the unionist parties with a bit more spring in their step. So this next year, I think, will be more difficult for Alex Salmond and the SNP than perhaps the last 18 months have been.
But Hamish, in relative terms, possibly, but in actual terms, Alex Salmond as a party leader still has phenomenally high approval ratings, and in terms of the public recognition even that he gets. So you may be saying that they're coming back relatively, but realistically, how significant is that?
I think it is very significant. Yes, the First Minister has very good approval ratings, as does his party. But the focus for the next 2.5 years, as Magnus said, is going to be on independence. And that's where there is a difference. There are people who support the First Minister, who support the SNP, who think they're doing a good job for standing up for Scotland, but who don't like the idea of independence. And with the focus now being shifted onto independence, almost to the exclusion of everything else, that difference is going to tell. And I think it'll tell psychologically as well.
If we don't do the referendum and we don't do any of the obvious things, is something below the radar, do you think, going to emerge because of the police mergers idea?
Well,
because that seems hugely controversial, but hasn't been discussed. Really.
I think there are, a few sort of real world issues, if you like, that we'd be unwise not to keep an eye on, and certainly the police mergers is one of them. 8 police forces will be merged into a single national police force, as we know. It's a big undertaking and it's a very, very tight timescale. All this has to happen by April the 1st next year.
Also issues of political control.
Well, there are issues of political control. I mean, we know from bitter experience that big undertakings like this don't always go smoothly according to plan. It throws up the issues of jobs. The unions are warning that there could be 3,000 civilian workers laid off, although the police authorities say the figure would be about a quarter of that. And also, as you say, the issue of political control. If there's the merest hint that the very powerful new Chief Constable of Scotland is basing his policing priorities on political targets, that will be seized upon by critics who've said that this whole merger, although it may save money in the long run, it will bring the politics and the police far too closely together. So I think we need to keep a very close eye on how that happens.
And same-sex marriage as well, potentially another one to watch out for.
Same-sex marriage, again, I mean, I think Alex Salmond is facing a difficult decision there because he knows that there will be a big backlash from the Catholic Church, other church groups, and some within his own side. I think, however, that he will take the progressive view on that. And also, we've got the curriculum for excellence. Kids are going back to school next month, 54,000 kids to start learning for new national exams which are replacing standard grades, amidst great worries amongst the teaching profession that they are not adequately prepared to teach those kids. Now, so far, Mike Russell, by I think more stick than carrot, it's fair to say, has averted the threat of strike action. But I think if this starts to go wrong over the next 6 months, then this will be a very big problem for the SNP government.
Right, James, we're going to give the last words to you. So, have you heard of Donald Trump?
I have heard of Donald Trump, yes. And I've heard of his enterprises in Aberdeen. On you go, Isabel. Tell me what you're going to say. No,
I just... we have had a lot of coverage in Scotland of Donald Trump. He's been a controversial figure. I know you're a golfie, if that's the right word, and you've edited a golf magazine. What do you think about, without landing us in the courts, if you can avoid it, Jim, some of the claims that have been made?
I would be very wary of Mr. Trump's claim that his project has come to a halt simply because of a wind farm. Let's say that project is on such a scale with a massive 5-star hotel, a huge amount of villas that he has to sell. That market is no longer there. Crucially, I think, the RNA also recently told Mr. Trump that even if his golf course, the claims of his golf course to be the greatest in the world, it would take maybe 15 to 20 years before that course came on the open rota. That means the fame is not really there. So I think what we're looking at is a very clever level of excuses just to make sure that that project is halted for the meantime. So maybe we've heard Mr. Trump limiting his marketing strategy. That's about it. But I would distrust almost everything he says, and I hope Mr. Salmon doesn't get played again.
Jim, let's look at G4S, just looking at the Olympic coverage. Obviously, that's developing today, and people are now saying, what did the Home Secretary know, and when did she know this? But if you actually look already at the sequence of events, in December, Seb Coe, organising the Olympic Committee, as chair of the Olympic Committee, goes to the security company and say, actually, we don't need 2,000 security people, we need 10,000. Why is none of the stick coming his way to say, how could that happen, and why would the security company sign up to that?
Frankly, I find it astonishing that we're at this position 2 weeks before the game starts, before we get to know this amount of detail. I find it astonishing that the Home Office would not have at least acted on a potential contract. If security was at the top of that agenda, they must have known how many they wanted there, how many security were there, were the security trained, had all the whole part of that G4 contract, was it in place? Now, I don't think we should be shifting the blame towards LOCOG too much, although I think the same thing, maybe a lesser question can be asked of Seb Coe. What frightens me is that if this is the level of preparation just on security, this is the stuff that we know at the top. Remember, underneath there's going to be a vast amount of, if you like, under the radar security that we don't know too much about. I just want to make sure. I think everybody wants to make sure that these games have to begin and run successfully, and we cannot afford them to be derailed by, if you like, plans that have simply been put in a minister's drawer. So I would expect after the games are finished, we may be looking at maybe a reshuffle that there'll be some fairly big names going.
Right.
I think
We have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed.